Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Harvest Community Church podcast. This is Chris Quinn, one of the associate pastors at Harvest, and I'm joined here by Pastor Matt Garino. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, thanks for welcoming me to
That's
my own house.
yeah, we're in a different location. The first one that I'm a part of that is not at the church.
Oh, that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
I wasn't here for the other one you recorded here.
Yeah,
Second time this has happened here, but
right.
not.
The secondary podcast studio, aka my dining room.
I love it. That's fantastic. So yeah, Matt, we're in this kind of new season in our church right now. We're calling it Renew, and we wanted to do an episode about this. This Renew season is connected to the traditional church calendar season of Lent, and wanted to kind of take an episode to help our people kind of think through this season, get a little bit more info about it, especially for those who
Yeah.
maybe have missed the family gathering. So we're recording this on February 27th. So the family gathering happened on February 19th, just over a week ago. And maybe even if you're new to Harvest, we want to kind of catch you up on what this Renew season is. And we're going to talk a lot about, like, why do we even have this Renew season? So Matt, could you take just a couple minutes to talk about the idea of seasons of spiritual growth and rhythms that we find within the church calendar, even biblical history?
Yeah, and I think that this podcast is a good one to do, even if you were at the family gathering, because we're going to talk a little bit more about the whys behind the Renew season that we really didn't even talk about then. So I think this is
Yeah.
good for everybody. And I think, yeah, that's a great place to start. Because the reality of the world we live in, and you even see this reflected in the Bible, is that there are, seasons. There are people today like to use the word rhythms. It's a little bit trendy, but it works
Right.
for our context here. So I'm going to go ahead and use that word. There are just rhythms in life. Like, if we're going the same speed all the time, eventually you just disengage. Whether it's like you're going hard all the time, go, 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 it just wears people out.
Right.
Or if you kind of like settle back and just kind of go to more moderate pace all the time, people just get bored and they tune out.
Mm.
So there's times, whether it's like sleeping and waking, or, times where we work hard for a season and then we back off and take a vacation. There's just natural rhythms in life, or seasons of, planting and sowing, all that kind of thing. So there's these rhythms that are just built into the creation order, and God uses those with his people a lot. So you see, like, the Old Testament religious calendar, God intentionally built in these religious festivals and seasons. I'm thinking right off the top of my head, like the Feast of Ingathering, it was called, or the Feast of Tabernacles. It had different names, but there was like 8 days, if I'm remembering correctly, once a year, where they would do these special things around the harvest time, and they would actually go build these booths or these tents and go live in them for a week. It's like pitching a tent in your backyard. Let's all go live in the tent, for a week.
Right.
And you can imagine that would catch a family's attention. Mom, Dad, why are we living in a tent for a week out in the backyard? And God would have them do that for like 8 days a year. And then the rest of the year, you go back to your normal life. And
Yeah.
it catches your attention. Of course, it takes a lot more work and a lot more energy.
Yeah.
You'd have to go build this booth. You'd have to change your lifestyle. And you do that in a way that it became a very special thing, because it was a way of focusing real intently on something for a while to remind yourself and educate your kids and build habits.
Yeah.
And then you would just kind of go back to your normal life. And so I think there's just a wisdom in recognizing that there are seasons, there are rhythms in an annual calendar, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. We should go hard after things for a while, and then there's times that we back off. I don't think we ever want to totally disengage,
Right.
but there's times where we kind of back off into a more normal rhythm. So maybe last thought here would just be like in relationships, like my marriage with my wife. I mean, there's times where Amy and I are gonna go out on a date, or sit down on a Saturday morning or whenever we can find the time and say, hey, for the next hour or two, we're just gonna talk about issues that are on the table, or talk about our marriage and our
Yeah.
relationship. Or maybe once a year, a couple might go away on an annual marriage retreat or a marriage conference. Well, that's a rhythm, a season where you're going to focus real hard on your marriage for a while. And then you kind of go back into your normal rhythm where you're not ignoring your marriage, but there's just a lot of other stuff going
Yeah.
on. So I think just that intense focus and then kind of back into a normal rhythm is sort of a healthy thing. And that's sort of where all this kind of starts.
Yeah, and I think there's a human tendency to, when we don't have those special seasons, to kind of get into this see, or even just like you even said, just that even line kind of fall back into this routine so that it just kind of becomes nothing,
Mhm.
where it just
Yeah,
then nothing happens.
yeah.
We have a
It,
tendency to do that.
it can just become background noise. Even the
Yeah.
most important things in life, like our marriages or our relationship with God. It's not like we forget it, but we kind of forget it. And it's like, it shouldn't be background noise, And
Yeah.
sometimes the changing of the rhythms, really help us with that.
Yeah, so let's talk real quickly about the kind of history of Advent and Lent in the history of the
Mhm.
church. Like, so Advent being with Christmas, Lent being with Easter. Kind of let talk about that for a couple minutes.
Yeah, so there's all these Old Testament festivals, and there really aren't any in the New Testament.
Hmm.
There's no really prescribed, like, hey, Christian church, you need to take 4 weeks before December 25th to celebrate the birth of Christ. Like, that's nowhere in the New Testament. So, historically, for the last 2,000 years, New Testament churches have also created some kind of normal rhythms within an annual calendar to focus on different things. And the two big ones are surrounding, the birth of Christ, Christmas, and then the death and resurrection of Christ, like the two
Hmm.
greatest sort of events that define the reality of our faith,
Right.
at Good Friday and Easter in the second case. And so you had these two seasons, and there are others depending on kind of what church tradition you're a part of, but those are probably the two big ones where, yeah, so for 4 weeks, 4 Sundays around Christmas time, you'll focus on getting your heart ready to really celebrate the birth and the advent of Christ, the incarnation in a
Hmm.
special way. And then maybe a little bit less well known is the bigger one, kind of interesting, where for 40 days before Easter, there's this season that's been called Lent. So, how do Christians really prepare their hearts to celebrate the death of Christ and the resurrection of Christ and really make that time special? And it's sort of modeled on Jesus's 40 days of fasting in the wilderness. That doesn't mean there's biblical command here. It's just like that's the idea. There's a biblical pattern, is
Yeah.
sort of the idea. We don't have to do this scripturally, but it's coming from Jesus's 40 days of fasting, which itself was modeled on the Israelites' 40 years of wandering in the wilderness.
Right.
So the whole point, you can see it biblically, like we sort of go through this time of recognizing our need. It's a 40-day wilderness journey, is the
Yeah.
idea that culminates in the resurrection of Christ as the answer to our heart's greatest need. So
Mhm.
that's kind of happened sort of historically. But then you have the Protestant Reformation.
Right.
And so for the last 500 years now, there's a lot more denominations out there, and
Right.
some of them are more high church, as we tend to call it, and others are more low church. So higher church denominations tend to be much more formalized, much more liturgical, even Protestant churches. And then lower church just tend to get rid of a lot of that formalism, including these religious calendars. And of course, as Baptists, we're part of that low church tradition.
Right.
So a lot of people in churches like Harvest really aren't even familiar with these church traditions, except incidentally, Advent. For whatever reason, that one's
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
a lot more normal, even in low church circles, over the last few decades in the
Hmm.
US, for whatever reasons. Lent, not quite so much, but anyway, that's kind of where we're at
Yeah.
right
So
now.
what's Harvest kind of history with both of those, Advent and Lent? As you said,
Mhm.
Harvest is more low church, meaning less formalization, less, focus on the spirit or the church calendar.
Yeah.
But talk about Harvest's history with that.
Yeah, so I've been at Harvest for 16 and a half years, and they already had a pretty well established tradition of doing Advent when
Hmm.
I got there. So we've kind of continued to do various things with the 4 Sundays around Christmas for a while. Lent was brand new for Harvest, and we started it, gosh, I'd have to look back, 7 or 8 years ago
Hmm.
now. So, like, it's not really new anymore, but it's not something we've always done. It's something we've been doing for a little while. And we started it 7 or 8 years ago as a way to really focus on spiritual growth and preparing our hearts for Easter, which, as I
Right.
said, the incarnation is super important. But the absolute burning hot center of our faith is the death and resurrection of Christ. And so,
Right.
if it's worth taking a few weeks to really prepare our hearts for Christmas, well, it's definitely worth taking a few weeks to really prepare our hearts for Easter. And the thinking when we started it 7 or 8 years ago was, in particular, let's prepare our hearts for Easter by focusing on some aspects of the gospel and conversion that we felt like modern evangelical churches sometimes miss. So we
Yeah.
would focus a lot on the weight of our sin
Mm,
and the wrath of God and the need that we have to really repent of sin, not
yeah.
just kind of say, I believe in Jesus, but what does
Mhm.
repentance actually look like? And so that was kind of how Lent started. We said, let's take 40 days to work on some kind of common spiritual disciplines that are not common to us, but they are common historically, like fasting, which actually is a biblical concept
Yeah.
and most American Christians just don't do it.
Yeah.
But not just about fasting. It's like, how do we use fasting to really focus our heart on repentance and sin? So that's what we started doing. And we kind of found that it was pretty useful.
Mm,
A lot of people in the church engaged with it at different levels. We tried to do it in a very low church way. We tried to be
right.
really clear that we're not trying to be like Anglican or Catholic here. We're just trying to focus on repentance and sin. Um, but a number of our people, embraced it really well. Others, it wasn't really their cup of tea, but that's fine. It's just it seemed to serve us well, so we kept doing it for a while. And then the pandemic hit and shut everything down. So
Right.
that kind of brought us up to where we were at like a year ago when the church was open again and we were able to do these larger gatherings. And we're like, well, here we are in the Lent season. What are we going to do?
Right. So last year we started this new thing, my first year here, called the Renew season. So how does this Renew season idea fit with our kind of post-pandemic emphasis on becoming a disciple-making church?
Yeah, yeah, great question because I think that was the big change. I was saying a lot, both kind of in behind the scenes leadership meetings and publicly in our services, and people were agreeing. But, when we were in the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, we kept saying, look, programmatically, nothing is sacred. You
Right.
know, we're not just going to keep doing stuff because we've always done it before. And so we wanted to, the church was in dry dock, we said, during the pandemic. All of our programs shut down, nobody was meeting. And so we knew the meeting restrictions were going to lift and we were going to able to start doing our gatherings and our programs again. But we deliberately said, let's look at every program before we just restart it. We don't want to
Yeah.
just go back to being exactly the same church coming out of the pandemic that we
Mhm.
were going into it. So why are we doing everything that we're doing? And if we need to change some things, let's change them. If they're serving a great purpose, let's do them. If we need to get rid of stuff, let's get rid of them. And that included this Lent focus.
Right.
So we're like, well, we've been doing at the time, we'd been doing Lent for, I don't know, whatever it was, 6 or 7 years. And like I said, it seemed to have served a purpose, but it was probably at the place where we're like, well, this is just going to become rote and routine unless, I mean, is it still serving a purpose? Well, at that time, we also were coming out of the pandemic really laser focused in a fresh way on how do we become more of a disciple making church?
Yeah.
And that was the core question. That really had nothing to do with Lent, but that was the main thing we were thinking about. So when we say we were looking at every program and trying to figure out should we keep doing it, we had a paradigm, we had a standard by which we were evaluating those programs. It wasn't just like, do we like it or not? It was like, is this helping us actually be more of a disciple making church? Is it helping equip our members to be disciples who make disciples? If so, let's keep doing it. If it needs to tweak, let's tweak it. If it's not helpful, let's get rid of it.
Yeah.
So we passed the Lent season through that same grid, and we said, well, the emphasis on things like fasting and repentance and sin has been useful, it's been helpful, but we have a greater focus now on becoming a disciple making church. So could this 40-day season be adjusted and tweaked in a way where the emphasis becomes less on sort of traditional fasting and mortification of sin? It's the old theological word,
Mhm.
putting to death sin in my body, confessing and repenting.
Yeah.
Not that we're ignoring those concepts anymore, but we just kind of felt like, is this maybe the time to shift the focus a
Yeah.
little bit more strongly toward what would it look like for us to take this season and grow as disciple makers?
Mm,
And that's kind of what informed our thinking. So yeah, very much in the last, this is now the second year we've done it. We shifted it, we changed it. That's why we changed the name. It's still the Lent season, and we're not really shy about that term, but we're not really primarily billing it as like Lent anymore. Now
yeah.
it's Renew.
Right.
And it happens to coincide with the historical Lent season. But this is the time where we want to say, what would it look like for us to focus as a church for 6 weeks on let's really focus hard on growing as disciple makers and see if the Lord brings some long term benefit out of
Mhm.
that.
So kind of the question that pops up in my head thinking about that is like we have all kinds of different times during the year we could do this renew season, right? We could do it during
Mhm.
Advent. We
Sure.
could do it pretty daring to do this. We could do it during the summer. So
You
why
could.
that would be super daring, but why the Lent season? What prompted us to use the Lent season for that purpose?
Yeah. Yeah, it would be daring. That was a nice way to put it. It would actually fail, is what would happen. uh,
That's fair.
because summer in the Pacific Northwest, you don't have to be a professional pastor in a church to know this. I mean, it's summer, man. I've Amy and I have been living in the Northwest for 20, almost 9 years now. We didn't grow up here. I actually grew up in the Bay Area in California, where the
Mhm.
weather is like the same all year long.
Mhm.
And summer was not that different than the rest of the year. It was kind of interesting. People would go away for a couple weeks on vacation, but then they would come back and just pick up life. So you could do church programs pretty much 12 months a year without changing too much. And I
Yeah.
got to Oregon and I realized like that is not the case.
Right.
And I've nicknamed it OSS, Oregon Summer Syndrome, right? I
Mhm.
mean, people just, man, once Memorial Day hits, and especially once the temperature changes, usually around like mid late June, and you get more sunny days, man, some switch flips in all of our minds, and people are functioning different, and we're out playing, we're just doing different stuff. So um, that I think made us realize like you could do a focus on disciple making at any point in the year. You're right. Sort of arbitrarily, you could just pick any 3 week or 6 week period and say, let's do that. And there wouldn't be anything wrong with that. But one of the things we did as a ministry staff, actually, right after the time you came on,
Mhm.
so it was just about a year ago, we actually sat down for a while and based on our experience, we tried to actually map out what are the different rhythms in the life of our congregation,
Yeah.
which are actually not that different than other congregations here in the Northwest. We're pretty typical in this regard.
That was my impression too, thinking about my experience. It was
Yeah.
very similar to my experience. I've always worked in the Northwest. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I would say the same thing with the past church I was on staff at, which was a much larger church on the other side of town, but it was the same thing. And so we realized that, yeah, summer, man, people are doing summer stuff, and that's just not the time to launch big ministries. We need vacations. That's a time for the congregation to breathe and to rest and to rejuvenate. And so we actually tracked out that there were like 7 or 8 different we actually wrote them all down.
Mhm.
7 or 8 different identifiable seasons during a 12-month calendar year in the life of our congregation. And for our purposes today, I'll just talk about 2 of them. There were 2 seasons where, on the whole, we as Pacific Northwesterners are more um, of a mindset to dig deep, lock in, and run hard for a little while.
Yeah.
One of those is in the fall. So, like late September, school has started, summer's behind us, and there's kind of an energy to like, it's a new school year, off we go. And the other one, coincidentally, is right about this time of year.
Mhm.
So, late January through like maybe spring break, that mid-March kind of time frame. And it's a season where people are, Christmas has passed us. We've all kind of recovered from it. And then starting in mid late January, somewhere around there, it's dark outside, it's cold, and it's a new year. And there's kind of a hunger to say, let's go do something
Yeah.
significant. So we would notice this even like with attendance at Sunday school classes or Bible study groups or whatever. You could actually track how many people would stay engaged with those things. And during this season, participation rates are higher. Again, we're very typical for other churches in that. And then during other seasons, it's much more of a struggle to get people to really lock in. And so, as many things as you could say about that, that's just a reality. We recognize it's a rhythm. Well, this second rhythm coincidentally sort of coincides with the traditional Lent season
Yeah.
pretty closely. Lent shifts around a little bit depending on the date of Easter. But to us, it just seemed like, hey, this is a good time. You got this 6.5 week period, this 40-day period, um, to lock in traditionally that really coincides with a time that we're ready to lock in anyway. So let's just use that to serve the purposes that we believe God has called us to as a church, to be a disciple making church. And let's lock in there and use it as a run up to Easter. And then we'll celebrate Jesus, which our church has always done well. We love celebrating the resurrection.
Yeah.
So, and that's awesome. I love that about
Yeah.
our church. And so this is just a good season to really focus in and build up to it and then have a huge celebration because of Jesus at the end of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I even remember kind of my initial thought when we were going into this last year, my first year doing the Renew season, I was thinking, okay, I'm really excited about this. And I think I even said this at the family gathering last year, where it's like, I'm excited to do something to actually prepare for Easter, because usually I'm just so focused on getting things ready because it's, quote unquote, the Super Bowl for churches on
Right.
Easter, and literal language I've heard. And so I just was like so focused on programs, programs, programs. And it was like I'd get to Easter and my brain would just go, oh, I haven't even thought about this. I haven't even like reflected on
Oh,
this.
right. Jesus rising from the
Oh,
dead.
yeah,
That might
that's
be important.
right.
Yeah.
That might be an important thing for me to think about.
Yeah.
So I was really excited. And I think I even said this at the family gathering, like, I'm excited to see what this does. And
Yeah.
it was really powerful. It was really powerful for us. And this idea of creating this personal growth plan. So,
Yeah. That's
we
awesome.
create this plan to help people grow. So kind of talk about that for a minute, Matt, and
Yeah.
then like why do we do that?
Yeah, so that's the biggest new feature. We didn't just change the name of the season from Lent to Renew. Functionally, and more important than the name changed, we changed what we're actually doing during this 6.5 week period. So last year was the first year we did that. We've modified it and growing it this year. But the idea is, okay, what does it mean to participate in the Renew season at Harvest? Bottom line, it means I'm going to create a personal growth plan where we're actually going to give some structure to that so people aren't having to come up with something out of, on a blank canvas, but it's flexible enough that people can customize that to where they most need to grow because everybody's in a bit of a different spot. So the idea of a personal growth plan is I'm going to actually think and pray about it and write down a short term couple of spiritual goals that I'm going to pursue over this 6.5 week period. And I'm going to go hard after it. And the act of thinking about it and writing it down is just a way to really focus our minds and focus our hearts on saying, I'm going to do this. I mean, you can do anything for 6 weeks. Sometimes it's hard to go from 0 to 60 and think about completely changing your life with one decision,
Yeah.
but you can change a 6 week period. You can take a step in a 6 week period. And so that's where the idea of a personal growth plan came out of. It's like, okay, if we want to be better disciple makers, that's a really big, broad concept. What does that mean? Well, I got to bring that down to practical level where people can lock in and say, this is how I'm going to grow as a disciple maker this year. So I'm going to write this goal down and then I'm going to focus on that for 6 weeks
Yeah.
and see what the Lord does with it. And so that was a new idea for us. Last year, it seemed to go pretty well. I think it was new and the church was still kind of recovering from COVID. So it was a little hard to track exactly how many people participated, but just anecdotally, I talked to numbers of congregation members who did personal growth plans and found them helpful. We got feedback from them about how to improve them. So we've improved it this year. And so far, initially, I'm getting more anecdotal feedback that it sounds like more people are making these plans,
Yeah.
which really excites
That's
me.
true.
And writing some things down, and we'll just sort of see where that takes us. So the bottom line is the personal growth plan makes it practical.
Yeah.
To be in part of the Renew season, you're not just showing up to church like you always are and seeing some different graphics or hearing some different language. You are actually doing something different than you normally would as a regular participant at Harvest.
And so one of the things that I really thought of when it came to this Renew season is maybe some of the people in our church who struggle with developing a more like consistent spiritual habit of, the spiritual disciplines of reading their Bible, fasting, praying, those kinds of things. So how does this season help people in that
Yeah.
kind of in that boat?
Yeah, they're not alone. Not only do those individuals struggle with it, all Christians do, and we do as a church, which is again pretty typical. But one of the things we recognized coming out of the pandemic as church leaders was there's various things that we do well as a church, and there's a couple areas where we thought we really needed to grow.
Yeah.
And I'm probably public offender number one in this, so I feel like I can talk freely about this because I'm mostly talking about myself. We've tended to be really good at explaining the Bible and communicating our theology and our core values and a vision. The idea of being disciple makers is not new at Harvest. What we have not historically been strong at is helping people figure out how to participate in that themselves.
Right.
So if you participated at Harvest, you get good Bible teaching, you get good theology, and I'm going to overstate this a little bit, but it's kind of up to you to figure out how to make that a reality in your own life. And some people can do that if they're really spiritually mature, other people struggle. And so it's just like, how could we as a church, I use the term operationalize it more?
Mm.
We know what our theology and our vision is, but how do we make it more of a reality for our members. Our job is to not just teach them, as essential as that is. Our job is to equip the saints to do the work of
Yeah.
ministry. And equipping always includes teaching. It starts with teaching, but I don't think it's just limited to that. It also deals with developing skills and giving people tools in their tool belts to get up and go do these kinds of things themselves, whether it's Bible reading or sharing the gospel or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
that's where the personal growth plan helps. We came out of the pandemic sort of realizing we want to be better at equipping our people and training our people, not just teaching them, but also training them how to put that into practice themselves and encouraging them to do that and holding them accountable to that and helping them take steps. And we realized, hey, maybe that's a reason to tweak this renew season, this Lent season. What if we create personal growth plans? We give people concrete examples of how to do this. We encourage them to share it with one another. We encourage them to take some steps and try some stuff and succeed and fail and whatever. That's the Christian life. But you're learning when you get moving, not
Yep.
just when you hear us talk about moving. So that's kind of the idea. It's helping. We're hopefully better operationalizing our vision for our people. That's what I hope people experience, that they're not just left on their own to figure out what this means. This personal growth plan gives them some examples of what that could mean. But then also, hopefully, I hope they operationalize it. That
Yeah.
they actually write down the plans and they start doing some things rather than just hearing about it or agreeing with it.
Yeah, and I think at the same time, it also helps people to see the benefits of these things and develop kind of more longer term habits
Oh
on
yeah,
those things.
yeah.
Like for give a personal example. So one of the things we decided to do, Lindsay and I, was we were going to fast from streaming shows because we just that was what we did. And we
Hmm.
just would come home and it's like, okay, let's stream. What are we watching tonight? What are we watching? And it was almost every night for a period of time. And we just got so convicted by that. So we're like, okay, no, we're cutting it off. And that's what we fasted from last year. And it actually, like, we got kind of back into that a little bit, but not anywhere near as much as
Yeah.
where we were. We had a new, like, category in our head of, no, that actually put us into a place that we didn't like. Let's not go there.
Hmm.
Let's not go there again. And so now we're doing that same thing again. And it's actually been, for me, it's been an easier transition where
Yeah,
it's like, cool, yep,
it's good.
we're back in, and now I'm okay with it because I don't need to just be endlessly streaming things all the time.
Yeah.
You know,
And real quick, I had a similar example for Lent several years ago. I decided to fast from lunch once a week, just skip the meal and go on a walk and pray.
yeah,
And so I did that. And that was a huge deal at the time. I didn't skip meals, and eventually, like, I liked that so much. I did that for a couple of years during Lent, and then I just started doing it regularly. So after Lent was over,
yeah,
it just became like every Monday, I just fasted from lunch and I would go on a walk and I would pray. And I did that for several years, all the way before the pandemic and through the pandemic. It just kind of became a new habit. And because I've changed my diet around and some, I've kind of changed that now recently. But for like 4 or 5 years, that habit was sort of new. And so now I'm back to saying, okay, with a new eating plan, how do I incorporate fasting into it? Whereas before, I was never even thinking about fasting.
yeah,
And this Lent focus has just helped me actually kind of think about that more and make it a regular rhythm. So the ideal is that we would not only do this for 6 weeks, but we would take something from that to incorporate in our regular game. And
yeah,
our discipleship would change because we've focused on some new habits.
yeah. That we would see the benefit from it, and then as a result, go, oh, because this has brought such benefit, I'm going to
Mhm.
keep doing it,
Mhm. Yeah,
and not just go, okay, it's over. I'm
right,
back to the way I was before. No,
right,
that's we can't go down that road.
right.
So let's talk for a couple minutes about the ways people can misunderstand and some misconceptions about kind of the renew season,
Yeah,
and then how do we respond to those.
yeah.
So first of all, someone might say this is overly formalized, kind of doing our discipleship in a traditional kind of high church way. What would be your response to that?
Yeah, I've had a couple people say that over the years. They have all, as I'm quickly rifling through my mind and remembering these conversations, every one of these was a former Catholic.
Mm,
Um, Nobody else in the church, from my experience, this is just my anecdotal experience, has really struggled with that. So there's a number of people who have always, like me, been from low church backgrounds, and they've actually loved some of the formalization and a little bit more of the ritual, like when we used to have the Ash Wednesday service. And you get the ashes on your head. Like, that's just something we never did before. They thought it was really cool because it was new. And then I had a couple former Catholics going, I'm struggling with this. Like, I left that stuff years ago when I found Jesus. Don't bring that back in. And so For those people, my basic response has just been two things. One, most of what we've already said, so I won't repeat it all. It's just like we're not trying to be like Anglican or Catholic here. That's not the point. We're not trying to change who we are. We're low church Baptists. We're very happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we recognize the value of a season of focus for all the reasons we've already explained. So I would just encourage them to say, don't worry, we're not trying to bring any of that back in.
Right.
That stuff's not haunting you from your past. And also just validate the fact that for those folks with that experience, that's a struggle. And I get that. I don't have that struggle because I didn't have that experience, but that struggle is legit. So, like, it's okay to struggle with this. Don't worry, we're not trying to change it. And then the other thing I've just encouraged people with is if it's a struggle for you, don't do it. This is not a biblical command to create
Yep.
a personal growth plan or to go to an Ash Wednesday service or whatever. So you're free to like not participate or to participate differently in
Yeah.
this aspect of church life. And I've said that to a couple people, and it just kind of gave them the freedom to like, oh, okay, I'm fine with it. So anyway, that would be my encouragement.
Mm-hmm. And then some might even go to the length of calling this like bootstraps Christianity. So I mean,
Yeah.
what we mean by that is kind of overly like working too hard to kind of maybe even earn your favor with God.
Right.
You
Right.
know, yeah, respond to that one.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a big application point in the sermon I just preached yesterday. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that one up too, because I think that's my bigger fear or my fear that one's maybe more widespread. Is that people who understand that we're saved by grace alone, through faith alone, and Christ alone, will look at all this emphasis on personal growth plans and start to feel like, oh, we're trying to, earn our salvation or even drive our own sanctification, our own process of becoming more holy. And obviously, that's just not the case. Certainly, again, our theology hasn't changed, and our theology is informing what we do. But I would say this: the greater danger for people more broadly in our society today is to be so kind of self-focused that we're not doing enough
Yeah.
in our Christian life.
Yeah.
And in particular, that's a cultural thing. And then it's also a low church kind of evangelical thing. We rightly are so good at emphasizing that you're saved only by grace, not by works, to distinguish ourselves from Roman Catholics and other religions. And we should do all of that because it's theologically accurate. But you can then be left with this impression that, oh, well, then I guess the picture of the ideal Christian life is I just sit back and trust Jesus and kind of don't really do much. Because if you start doing things, you don't want to be like Catholic, or you don't want to be a Muslim who thinks they've got to do the 5 pillars of Islam or whatever, right?
Right.
We're different. We're different by not doing anything. I don't know if the people would ever say that, but that's almost the impression. So I think this helps us realize that no, the Apostle Paul is like, I buffet my body and I make it my slave. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work within you. There's no contradiction between the power of God to make us grow, which is what the whole book of Colossians is about, that we're
Right.
preaching on right now, on the one hand, and then on the other hand saying, so you've got to put off your old life and put on your new life. That's something you and I are supposed to do. So we do this in cooperation with God. And so this is a season to say, don't just think you've got to reform your old self and create a plan to do that. This is a season to say you've got to get in touch with the new self Jesus has created.
Yep.
And that's your job to do. So we're going to try to help you do that.
Yeah. We're just simply kind of joining in on what God's already doing
Mhm.
with us. He's already doing a work. And so we're just going to do our part. And basically, I mean, it's opening up the opportunity for God to do something. If you're just sitting back and not doing anything, you're not allowing for God to work. But if you're actually doing the spiritual disciplines of Bible reading and fasting and praying, you're actually giving an opportunity for God to reform
Right.
and reshape you.
Right.
And yeah, so this is not a bootstraps Christianity kind of thing. And then kind of the last one is someone, where someone might think, oh, a plan like this shouldn't even be necessary. People should already just be pursuing their spiritual growth. Like they should just already be doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, respond to that one.
Yeah. That is a mostly correct idea, I think, applied very badly to real life.
Mhm.
And here's what I mean by that. I would assume a person who thinks that way is picturing in their minds what a mature Christian life should look like. And in a mature Christian life, all of these things, Bible reading and sharing your faith and prayer, should already be ingrained habits. And if that's what a person is saying, I'm in complete agreement with it. That's what's called spiritual maturity. So it's right to have a picture of spiritual maturity in our mind and say those things would already be a part of such a life. But here's the problem: to then assume that therefore a church should never structure a way for people to develop those new habits is to assume that everybody in the church already is spiritually mature,
Yeah.
or to assume that the path to spiritual maturity is just to figure it out on your own.
Hmm.
And both of those are just not the case. I mean, anybody that's ever raised children knows, like,
Yes.
you have to train them and you have to discipline them and you have to show them how to do it and help them form habits. And obviously, the goal is you are still learning. I mean, you teach your kids to like brush your teeth and wash behind their ears and clean their rooms when they're little. Now, if you're still teaching your 22-year-old to brush his teeth and tie his shoes, something's wrong.
Right.
Like, yeah, at that point, he should have it down. But you don't just have a kid and then they get raised in your house and you never talk to them. And then you go at them when they're 16 and say, why haven't you cleaned your room, when you never taught them to clean their room?
Right.
Right? I mean, so you recognize as a parent, you need to train your children. And the Bible even says that, right? Raise up your children in the way they should go. Teach these things to your children. And the Bible uses that language not only with our physical kids, but it uses parenting and child language when it comes to spiritual growth,
Yeah.
right? So Book of Hebrews and many other places is saying like, you are young in the faith, you just need spiritual milk. Or in other cases saying should be further on in the faith now, you still need spiritual milk, but you need to be moving on to more solid food. And so I'm going to train and instruct you how to do that. So, and that's the whole idea of discipleship is all about. So anyway, I guess I would say like, yeah, we've got a church full of people. Every church, Lord willing, has got people from spiritually dead who are still finding Jesus for the first time, all the way up through spiritual infancy and spiritual adulthood, and then to spiritual maturity. And we want to help all of them grow.
Yeah.
And part of that is showing people what the path of growth looks like and giving them practical steps where they go, oh, I can take that step. And that's the very thing that will often propel them to maturity. Real quick personal anecdote from the church. When I got to Harvest, there was this initial idea. It was one of the things I had to get used to as a newbie to Harvest. There was this idea that we should never have to really talk about money in the worship services, because spiritually mature people should already have the discipline of giving.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't have to get up there and cajole people to give. If we're spiritually mature, we'll just give anyway. And the reason they thought that is because the church was founded by a bunch of fairly spiritually mature people who were already pretty disciplined givers.
Yeah.
So they kind of had this, I think, naive assumption, bless their hearts, that, well, everybody should just give and we should never really have to talk about money. And I kind of challenged that, and to their credit, I mean, people were willing to change it. And I said, why don't we start receiving an offering just once a month in the worship services? Because that gives us a great moment. It creates a space to talk about the discipline of giving, which is a biblical concept. Now, if you're already a mature Christian, you already know that. But, and hopefully you're already doing it. But what about the other Christians who aren't mature yet? They've never been told that. They've never been showed that. Are they just supposed to pick it up by osmosis? Well, it's not going to happen in most cases. So we're actually, when we don't have structured plans to help people mature in their faith, we're actually doing them a disservice. We're just kind of throwing them into the deep end of the pool and saying, figure it out. And you should be as mature as I am when I've been walking with Jesus for 30 or 40 years. And that's just ridiculous. I mean, that's actually pretty unkind. And it's also a really bad way to go make disciples. So it's a pretty ineffective way to follow Christ's command to make disciples.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I would agree. People should already be pursuing it, but we've kind of got this church culture, kind of an American evangelical church culture that has been so low church that just there are so many, in our kind of terminology, baby Christians that we need to help bring them up. And that's why
our privilege.
Yeah, it's our privilege. It's a joy to do that, to see that light kind of kick on. So just very couple quick kind of pragmatic notes. So why didn't we do an Ash Wednesday service this year?
Yeah, no program is sacred. So back when we started the Lent season, it was a big season and there was nothing on our church's calendar to kind of kick it off. So it seems sort of weird to just say, hey, we're doing this big thing. So y'all just go do it.
Right.
So the traditional way to kick off the Lent season is with Ash Wednesday. So we created this low church Ash Wednesday service, and we used it for 5 or 6 years to kind of kick off our Lent season. And I think it served us well. It served its purpose. But this year we ended up moving the family gathering that we used to do in the spring back up to the winter. And we used that, actually, we did that last year for the first time. We used that to really kick off the Lent season. And the family gathering is more of a natural harvest thing.
Yeah.
So we realized having two things, a Sunday night dinner followed up by a Wednesday night special service, was just, it was kind of redundant. There wasn't really a good reason for people to go to both. So this year we just said, no, the Ash Wednesday service served its purpose for 6 years, and now it's gone. Now we're kicking off the Renew season with the family gathering, and seemed to work well this year. We'll probably do that in the future. I'm just going to see how it goes.
That's awesome. And so now if someone wants to join in, right? So they maybe are just hearing about this for the first time whenever they listen to this podcast. Is it too late?
No, absolutely not. There's nothing sacred about the 40 days. So if you're hearing about this with 10 days left to Easter, go ahead and jump in, make a personal growth plan. Just visit harvestcc.org/renew, or on the Harvest app, you just tap on the Renew link there that pops right up on the home screen. It'll give you all the information about how to download a plan, fill out a plan, and I'd say join in, because it's just about forming some new habits that help me pursue Jesus and be a disciple maker better.
Yeah. So we encourage you all to join in wherever you are listening to this in the process of the Lent season. So we thank you all so much for joining us and listening to this episode. We hope this conversation was beneficial and that this will help you in the Renew season pursue a greater path for spiritual growth for you this year. We love you all, and we will talk to you soon.